Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the next presentation in our Signal Innovation Showcase. I'm George Seifers, Editor-in-Chief of Signal Magazine, and our next speaker is Noah Plotkin, Solutions Engineer with Silent Push. Noah is going to teach us about preemptive threat intelligence. So please welcome Noah to the podium.
Thank you, George. Hey, good afternoon, folks. My name is Noah Plotkin, and I'm a Solutions Engineer here at Silent Push. And today I want to be talking about preemptive threat intelligence, which is a critical adjustment in how we defend against faster, more evasive threats. Now, traditional cyber threat intelligence has been built around reacting to incidents, analyzing historical indicators, correlating known IOCs, and building detections after malicious activity has already taken place. But the problem with that model is it's always a step behind. By the time we've confirmed malicious intent, attackers have already oftentimes moved on. And what I want to walk through today is a more forward-leaning methodology, one that focuses not on the aftermath of an attack, but rather on the behaviors and infrastructure patterns adversaries use before any operations actually go live. And one of the most important concepts behind this is behavioral and pattern recognition. Just like humans develop routines and habits, threat actors also, whether state-sponsored or cyber-criminal focused or financially motivated, leave behind infrastructure fingerprints. And this includes maybe how they register and configure domains, how they structure their DNS records, which hosting providers they use, and how they change or rotate infrastructure over time. And by analyzing those patterns and applying them proactively, we can identify what we at Silent Push call indicators of future attack, which is infrastructure that may look benign today, but based on how it was created and has been managed over time, we can attribute with a high degree of confidence to certain threat groups and make assumptions that it's going to be used in future campaigns. As a case study for this, going to look at our threat intelligence team's research on a group we track as TA569. This group is known for delivering the SOC Ghoulish malware, which is part of the fake updates campaign, which has been active for years and linked to some of the most well-known malware strains in circulation. So let's first dig a little bit deeper into the problem with the current CTI approach by understanding what we can call the first detection problem. So as I mentioned, traditional detection of incidents has traditionally relied on someone first being hit. There has to be that patient zero in order to detect an incident and then be able to identify part of an adversary set of infrastructure. Maybe this takes the form of an EDR tool identifying suspicious behavior on a system, which then would trigger a response. And through those response efforts, we would discover the infrastructure that was used in the different stages of the attack chain. And those are typically referred to as indicators of compromise, or IOCs. Those IOCs maybe then are included in a report that's disseminated across the community or across different sharing groups. And then typically you take those IOCs, you extract them, you ingest them into a feed, and then you process them into detection rules for blocking or correlating against. The problem with that approach, though, is that it's inherently reactive. By the time we actually implement those indicators into our detection rules, adversaries have likely already started shifting to delivering their attacks using new infrastructure. And as a result, rarely will we ever hear of someone actually disrupting an attack by blocking an IOC. Those indicators are historic. So the problem here really is that someone has to be first hit in order to see where the adversary is coming from. And actors are moving faster than the current infrastructure-based detections that we're using today can account for. And this has really been the reality of threat intelligence. We've largely settled for sitting back and waiting for adversaries to attack and hoping that the detection rules that we have in place will identify the initial stages of an attack and our responses will then mitigate that threat. Effectively, CTI has become a form of record keeping. It's really the librarian of the cyber defense space. It, at times can provide valuable insights using post-breach data, focusing, for instance, on how an actor might move laterally, what exploits they might use, how they'll go about escalating privileges, all valuable, not meant to diminish the value that provides, but it doesn't necessarily help us identify and disrupt adversaries at the earliest stage possible, that being the infrastructure setup stage. So what does earlier detection look like? It's focusing on the infrastructure setup stage, as I mentioned. the basis really of intelligence-led defense is understanding the weapons of your adversary, and the infrastructure is the backbone of any offensive cyber operation. So starting on the left side here, we can start by detecting patterns in how adversaries build their infrastructure before there's even any traffic taking place, specifically through relationships in DNS. So for example, patterns like domain clustering, registrar patterns, CNAME chaining. This would really be the earliest form and opportunity for detection of malicious infrastructure being created. We can then focus on how adversaries are managing their infrastructure once it's already created. So specifically looking at how that infrastructure is changing through different change patterns, like the rapid rotation of domains across IP space, often referred to as fast flux infrastructure, which we'll take a look at in a moment here, or combining that with changes in name servers, which is often referred to as double fast flux infrastructure. And then that third stage, we can move to content-based patterns or fingerprints, things like JARM hashes or looking at the server configurations. And finally, the last step here is we can start to observe changes in the content that's being served, really more as a way to validate that the infrastructure is malicious. So for example, if initially a domain returns a blank page and then 24 hours later, that domain is serving up a phishing kit that's impersonating Microsoft 365, we can use that change in content as a validation that that domain or IP is malicious and it's now been weaponized. So let's use a TA569, a group known for delivering SOC-goalish malware, or what is commonly referred to as the fake updates campaign, as a case study and how we can really start to apply those principles. Specifically by identifying patterns in their infrastructure creation and management tendencies and applying those to forward hunts to look for infrastructure that matches those patterns. Just to provide some background on this group, those unfamiliar, this campaign has been active since around 2018, and what makes it especially dangerous is how deceptively simple the initial method is. So threat actors compromise legitimate websites like the one shown here, offering some vacation rentals down in South Carolina, and they'll inject a small snippet of malicious JavaScript into the page. And when a user goes and visits that site, they're served what appears to be a browser update prompt. And we can see that in the screenshot on the right there, often for Chrome or Firefox. And the design is really convincing. Victims are tricked into downloading what they believe is a legitimate update for their browser. But in reality, they're downloading remote access malware. Typically see this through a tool like a net support. And what makes TA569 especially dangerous is that they operate as initial access brokers. So once that malware is in place, the access is established, they often then sell that access to other threat groups, including ransomware operators. So the damage doesn't necessarily just come from the initial infection, it's really part of this larger criminal supply chain. So let's take a look at how they manage their infrastructure here. And this is really where things start to get interesting with this group or this campaign. TA569 is a heavy user of fast flux techniques. So what you're seeing here in the screenshot is a domain resolving to dozens of different IP addresses across different ASNs, rapidly and repeatedly, and that's not accidental. For some background just on fast flux as a technique, it's an obfuscation strategy, really, that rotates hosting infrastructure in real time to evade detection and takedown efforts. It's kind of like a shell game. The domain is there, but the hosting location keeps moving. And it's not just this particular threat group that's using this technique. It's used by many other threat activity groups like Gamardon or the Raspberry Robin infrastructure, just to name a few. And the idea here, again, really is that by frequently changing the underlying IPs, you make it harder for defenders to blacklist the infrastructure and then respond in time. But more broadly, kind of back to the root problem that I was discussing earlier, this illustrates a fundamental issue, that being attackers are moving much faster than traditional detection mechanisms. When your detection strategy relies solely on reactive IOCs, that means that the indicators that only appear after malicious activity has been compromised, you're inherently acting from behind. You're playing from behind every single time. And infrastructure like this is really built to stay one step ahead. It's rotating, it's evolving before anything even gets flagged. And that's why we need to really think about preemptive detection models, ones that focus on attacker behavior and infrastructure patterns, not just outcomes from historic indicators. So how do we actually go about detecting this kind of infrastructure? One approach is to look at a type of metric we refer to as IP diversity. It's a proprietary metric that we've developed at Silent Push that's tracking how many different IPs rather, a domain has resolved to over a condensed period of time, a window of 30, 60, 90 days. And when a domain suddenly resolves to 5 or more different IPs in short succession, it's a strong signal indication of automation and often of fast flux techniques. So what we're looking at here are patterns that would be extremely unlikely to occur during normal web hosting operations. For example, rotating through a dozen IPs in a 24-hour window across 5 different hosting providers would not necessarily be considered normal web hosting operations. And in this slide, you can really see the IP resolution pattern in the form of a timeline. So each bar here represents a different ASN, and you can start to visualize the infrastructure as it moves over time. When you detect this kind of activity and behavior early, before any content is served, you have opportunities now to disrupt adversary infrastructure before it's actually used in any kind of operation. You can also pivot then from fast flux behavior to broader infrastructure clusters. In this case, we observed dozens of sockle-ish domains suddenly resolving to the same IP address at the same time. That's a massive signal of automation, and it tells us these domains are under the control of a single operator, likely scripted to move in bulk format. And what's powerful about this is that if you detect just one domain in the cluster, you can quickly pivot to discover the rest, start to map out an adversary's entire infrastructure set. And these aren't just benign, these are often weaponized and they're ready to be activated in some form of a campaign. So we're not just identifying one malicious domain, we're starting to uncover entire malicious ecosystems. So how do we now start to turn all of this into action? This slide shows a real example of what one search query might look like when we're proactively hunting for TA569 infrastructure. We're starting to combine all of these different known patterns. So for example, the use of .org TLDs, DNS pod name servers, regru as the registrar that's commonly used, and then high IP and ASN diversity scores. And it's these traits when combined that form a behavioral fingerprint. Even if the domains are brand new and have never been seen before in any kind of IOC feed, we can still identify them based on how they were created and have been managed over time, sharing those common characteristics. And again, that's really what we're focused on at Silent Push. Our goal is to be able to go out and track adversary infrastructure for the purposes of creating preemptive threat intelligence. The concept of this isn't necessarily new. We, in a lot of conversations with teams, have noted that people are trying to do this, but it often takes combining 4 or 5 different tools, which all have separate data sets and that they don't integrate seamlessly, if at all. So our focus really has been building a solution that streamlines that process by combining first-party DNS and web content or scanning data that's self-sourced with behavioral analytics to start to focus on identifying attack staging before operations ever go live, giving defense personnel the opportunity to start to actually disrupt adversaries before an attack can be launched. Now, in order to do this, just to talk a little bit about that data collection methodology, you really need 2 different types of data. You need DNS data and you need content data to start to, again, validate that there is malicious content being served and it's transitioned from an indicator of future attack into an IOC. On the DNS data side, traditionally, teams have relied on passive DNS data, which is really only collected after someone or something has interacted with it. So what that means is you have to wait for it to actually be trafficked, which if the goal is to try to find preemptive or pre-weaponized infrastructure, it's not going to be useful. So what we've done is we've built an active resolution pipeline where we go out and collect domains and IPs from things like zone files, certificate transparency logs. We have thousands of proprietary honeypot networks running, grabbing all of these IPs and domains and forcing the active re-resolution of them at minimum every 24 hours. Meaning we don't buy passive DNS data, we don't have to wait for it to be trafficked, we force that active re-resolution ourselves. Now to start generating content data to understand what's actually being hosted on that, we then run endpoint scans on every IP and domain. And in doing so, we generate about 200 or so metadata attributes to classify what's happening on that IP or domain. Things like the JavaScript files that are referenced, favicon hash values, the server configurations, certificate use, all of which we can then start to build into queries to go out and look for similar or associated infrastructure. So we can start to track all of these behavioral shifts historically, which really allows us to understand not just what something is right now, but what it's been, and then how that behavior might mirror known threat infrastructure. It's based on everything that's happened before the IOC was formed. So to sum all of this up, by focusing on the ways in which adversaries create and manage their infrastructure, we can identify pre-weaponized infrastructure and start to disrupt adversary operations before any campaigns actually go live. I thank you all very much for your time and your attention today. You can come visit us at booth 2860. We're actually right behind here if you're interested in learning more, and we can give some more examples on different threat groups that we're tracking that can't necessarily share on a public stage here. But thank you all so much for the time and attention. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, leave that. Just
Yeah.
look like you're
Yeah. Thank you for bearing with me, guys. I don't know about that. Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Noah. That was great. And thank you all for being here. Please come back and join us at 3:20 for our next presentation.